everyone, welcome to Things Lucy Reads. I'm Luce and this is my Kindred review video. This is the first day of the blog tour for this anthology, which is running for the next week, I believe. I will put a link in the description to the OzYA bloggers Twitter and Instagram and blog page that contains all of the information about this tour and links to everyone who is part of it. Kindred is an anthology of 12 Love OzYA stories written by Australian authors. Each of the stories has an own voices element, whether that's identity or race or religion. This collection of stories is really diverse in terms of race, in terms of identity, in terms of gender identity, in terms of sexuality. I was overall really impressed with it and I've given it a 4 out of 5 stars. 3 of the stories had MM relationships, 4 of them had FF relationships, 2 of them featured a relationship between 2 non-binary people, and 3 of the stories did not feature a romance. In addition to own voices, sexuality and gender representation, there was questioning representation, autistic representation, wheelchair representation, Indigenous representation and Muslim representation. That was all own voices as well. There are so many things that I liked about so many of these stories that I could easily spend an hour talking about each of them. But in the interest of not making you watch a 12-hour long video, I'm going to condense it down to just the things that struck me the most about the stories. I thought that Marley's was a fantastic one to open with. It was absolute non-stop action the whole way through, and the entire time I was not only rooting for the main character but physically grinning from ear to ear. It was just so much fun and it really set the tone for the anthology, I think, in that here is this thing that you are going to enjoy. It may not be happy, but you're going to at the end feel like you've enjoyed it, and for the most part for me that was true. Erin Goff's was as good as I've come to expect from her after loving The Flywheel so much. It had a lot of layers and it had a heavy dose of mystery and fabulism, which I also really enjoyed and which I think really elevated it. It was one of the ones that kind of kept me guessing throughout the whole thing, and I didn't really understand everything that was happening until it all came together, and it was really good. Michael's story was set in a fantasy world about a boy who goes to see the village witch in order to save his sister, and this one had a really interesting take on the all magic comes with a price trope, and the twist was that the price wasn't a monetary one and it wasn't a sacrifice or anything tangible, but that didn't make it any less devastating. And I thought that it was a really interesting take on this thing that we've seen over and over again that really made it different. And when I got to that twist, I was kind of just like, yes. Jax's story in particular I really enjoyed. The protagonist and her love interest were both in wheelchairs, and that story was about the intersection of disability and queerness and how you're gonna receive support for one of them, but it's unlikely you're going to receive support for both of them, and that's an incredibly frustrating thing, which it is. That one also dealt with having a crush on someone that you think is so much cooler than you and then having that crush unrequited, and let me tell you, I felt it right in here because I'm not in a wheelchair, but other than that, my life. Nevo Zissens was another one that kept me guessing the entire time. It relied heavily on metaphor to deal with things like death and fear and anger and confusion, and even though I didn't also understand this one until it all came together at the very end, I actually in the beginning thought it was about drug addiction, and that turned out not to be the case. It was really satisfying when everything was resolved as much as the story allowed, and that story and also Jax's story had 2 absolutely amazing dad characters, and I really appreciated that we had that kind of rep in this book as well. Jen Wilde's story was also fantastic, although I can't really say that I personally liked it. It was objectively very good. She was very good at putting you in the shoes of the main character Audrey and really making you feel what Audrey was feeling. I absolutely felt for Audrey. I was proud of her when she overcame the thing that needed to be overcome and really kind of came into herself and her own strength and her own confidence. But the thing that needed to be overcome was a toxic friendship, and I just really don't have a good time reading about those. So I was kind of reading this from behind my hands like this, just peeking through my fingers, but like objectively it was really good. I just was uncomfortable to read it because of this subject matter. Christos Tsiolkas' story was okay. It dealt with teacher-student pedophilia, and I just personally feel that the way the story dealt with that was a little too glib to be suitable for an anthology for teens. Not that it's inappropriate, not that teens need to be protected from this, but the main character didn't ever condemn his father, the teacher, for what he had done with his student, but the antagonists of the story were the main character's sister and mother, who did condemn the father. And I just thought that that maybe could have been handled a little bit better to make it a little bit more suitable to be in a book for people who are either going to be in that situation, vulnerable to being in it, or close to someone who is or was. Again, objectively, it was fine. I just didn't really like it. Ellen Van Neerven's vision of a future Australia was alarmingly prescient and feels like it's something that could really happen in the future. It's about a political activist who gets discovered and their home is raided, and for their own safety and the safety of their family, they have to flee the country. And I don't think that I picked up on all of the details or understood all of the details, but I did really enjoy this story, and it did really speak to me as well. And the way that all of the locations and settings were described was almost tangible, really. The descriptions were absolutely fantastic, and I really felt that I was like in that place with the characters. Omar's story also had a really good use of metaphor, and this time metaphor was used to represent breaking out of the bonds that are put on you by your family, your religion, your society, and yourself. I really felt for the main character and the way he was so constantly pulled in so many different conflicting directions all the time. Another story that I really enjoyed was the one by Alison Evans. This one's called Stormlines. Alison's story was about a character called Marling who gets washed away from the place where V was living. And for most of the story, Marling is trying to get back, but eventually comes to the realization that maybe this place where V has ended up is not so bad after all. It was just a really quiet and calm story, and it was the second last one in the anthology, and I actually really appreciated that it was just so quiet and so calm, and that the non-binary rep obviously was so on point, because I had a real problem with one of the previous stories in the collection, and so this one was like a balm for that wound. Here is a clip from me from yesterday talking about one specific story in this book and why I think it was awful. And then the next one that I want to talk about is the one that I am still having extremely negative visceral feelings about, and it is called Sweet, and it was by Claire G. Coleman. Okay, so the good things about this novel is that all of the characters are Indigenous, that rep his own voices, and that was really good. Everyone was also queer. On the surface, also good. But this takes place in a future Australia where society is completely post-gender. Being non-binary is normal, everyone is referred to with they pronouns, and the societal norm is to wear clothing that is loose and flowing and completely hides your body. If you perform gender in any way, or look like you are performing gender, you are arrested by a division of the police called social crimes and essentially black-bagged, erased from existence. Body types are referred to with gender. Even though this is a post-gender non-binary society, body types have gender. Male-bodied, female-bodied. The main conflict of the story is that someone comes out for immense shock value as being a woman. They come out as being gendered in a post-gender non-binary society. And even though the friends are, on the surface, accepting, their acceptance comes in the form of, you're still our friend and we still really love you and accept you. You've always been special to us and this just makes you more special. That's never the reaction that I want. I never want to be told that I'm special. I don't want to be special. I want to be normal. And when this character came out as being gendered, the narrative immediately switched from using they pronouns to using she pronouns, which implies that pronouns are also gendered in this society, which is meant to be post-gender, which is meant to be non-binary. One of the characters, after this other character comes out, says that their parents are both gendered and that they think this non-binary cult that has taken over the country is weird. I believe that this story was written from a good place. I believe the intentions were good, but it was extremely ill thought out and it wasn't well executed, and all it has really done is be really clumsy and punch down onto the people that it should be representing. I'm 25. And I am secure in my sense of self and the validity of my identity. And even with all that, reading this story still felt like getting the wind knocked out of me. This is an anthology for teenagers. for queer teenagers. It is meant to show up for them, to be there for them, to comfort and to validate them, not to paint them as the villains. If we do get another anthology, and I hope that we do, I want a little more care to be taken and a little more thought put into who the stories are for, why they were written, and how they are going to be received by the people they're supposedly for. And I just want everyone to take this as an opportunity for improvement, for learning, for reflection, and to do better next time. Yeah. Basically, stories about reverse oppression never work. And we wouldn't accept this in the book community if the story had been about reverse oppression by disabled people, by non-white people, by people who identified as any other kind of queer. So I want to know why anyone thought it was okay to write a story in which non-binary people were the oppressors. Even without me stating it explicitly for you, I hope you will be able to tell I'm taking this so personally because it is personal for me. I've rated it a 4 on Goodreads, and I'm going to stick with that 4 rating just because the rest of the stories don't deserve to be penalized by this one. Thankfully, the anthology ended on a high note for me with the personal essay written by Benjamin Law, which was again about an intersection, this time of queerness and Chinese culture versus Australian culture. It was also about how he, in small ways, breaks down barriers and ingrained beliefs within his own family, and how usually as one of only a few queer members of that family, it falls to him to answer any questions about queerness that his non-queer relatives might have. And I'm the only queer person in my family, so I also really feel this because I get this too whenever anyone has a question, or even at work to a much greater extent. If anyone has a question, I'm the one that they ask. And it talks a little bit about how this becomes your job even if you don't want it to be your job, but there's no one else that they can ask, so you've got to do it. I also liked how he talked about challenging your own beliefs and your own ingrained internalized homophobia, which we all have, your own ingrained internalized misogyny, which again, we all have. And I just thought it was really, really relatable and really validating, and I really enjoy that it was the last part of the anthology because it really did kind of bring everything back up, and especially for me, I was able to end it on a positive note. Thank you very much to Walker Books and OzYA bloggers for allowing me to be part of this tour and for giving me this opportunity, and for so kindly sending me a copy of this novel to read for the purposes of this review. I apologize that this review video wasn't entirely positive, but I didn't have an entirely positive reading experience either, so I think it's fair. Thank you again. Thank you to everyone who has watched this video. I hope you enjoyed it in spite of the negativity. But I will see you when I see you. Bye everyone.